Tonight, I will tell you a story that was never meant to be revealed. A story that has been hidden for centuries, kept in the shadows of a past many wish to forget. This is not a theory, nor an invention. It is a confession, a truth that could shatter everything you think you know. At the heart of an empire that shaped the world's history, there lies a secret room, a hidden library, where knowledge was carefully erased. I was one of the few who had access to that room. I saw what was meant to stay buried forever. And now, for the first time, someone from within is telling it all, without fear, without limitations. What you are about to hear is not just a tale. It is the truth, a truth that will change everything. But before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because what you're about to hear here is something you won't find anywhere else. Now, prepare yourself, for what is coming will challenge everything you believe you know about the past. My name is Father John, and for many years, I served the Church, faithful to the teachings I was given since childhood. Like all seminarians, I was trained to serve, to teach, and to protect what, in theory, was the most precious thing: the truth. I believe all priests share a similar experience, a total dedication to God, a life given to the service of the Church, believing that the absolute truth is what is revealed through the scriptures and tradition. When I entered the seminary, everything seemed clear and simple. I was walking down a path of unwavering faith, and my steps were in harmony with what I was taught. However, it was when I was introduced to the true workings of the Church, to its oldest and most secret archives, that the first doubts began to arise. At first, everything seemed normal, but something within me, an uncontrollable curiosity, began to question what I was seeing. It was as if, by delving into the Church's oldest records, by accessing the texts few were allowed to touch, I began to see cracks in the entire history I had been taught. The first signs that not everything I had been taught made sense appeared when I began having access to documents and archives that should have remained hidden forever. The scriptures given to us were clear, but those I found in the archives didn't match the truth I had been imposed. What I saw and what I read weren't simply ancient texts. They were fragments of a different story, a story the Church had been trying to hide. One day, while carrying out my duties as the Order's librarian, I came across an unusual manuscript. The cover was simple, but the seal was strange. I knew that this book shouldn't have been there. But still, my curiosity led me to open it. What I found on the pages of that book changed the course of my life. It was a text that spoke of an alternative version of the creation of the world, something that contradicted the official narrative. I was shocked. How could this exist in the Church's archives, so close to me, and yet never have been mentioned? I immediately knew that something was terribly wrong, something being hidden for a reason. But what disturbed me the most wasn't just the content of that book. What was more disturbing was my own reaction. I, a dedicated priest, was being confronted with a truth that challenged the foundation of everything I had learned. How could this be? How could the Church hide something so vital? Soon I realized that what I had found wasn't an accident. It was calculated. It was made to remain hidden from most eyes. It wasn't just a book. It was a key to a larger mystery, a mystery that led me on a journey of profound questions. What else was being hidden? What else was concealed in the archives, far from the eyes of the faithful? The issue wasn't just that book. The issue was the truth. What else could be silenced? What? As a priest, I had always been taught to protect the faith, but now, in the face of this revelation, I was confronted with a reality I could no longer ignore. The history we know, the history everyone believes, Could it be a lie? A lie constructed over centuries? And if so, what else should be questioned? It was in that search for the truth that I found myself confronted with the greatest dilemma of my life. The story we know, the one everyone believes, could it be false? Could it have been built up over centuries? And if it was, what else was being kept hidden? After that night, everything changed. I had been living a lie, or worse, I had been living with a truth that had been hidden from me. What I found in those ancient manuscripts was only the beginning, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had to know more, but at the same time, I knew the consequences of pursuing this path. The church, the very institution I had sworn my life to, was not what I had believed it to be. The Vatican has always been a place of secrets. There are rooms no one speaks of, corridors so deep within the heart of the institution that they might as well be invisible. But I was allowed access to these places. At first, it felt like a privilege, a reward for my loyalty and dedication. But as I moved deeper into the archives, I began to see that it wasn't a privilege at all. It was a trap. And the deeper I went, the more the light of truth began to fade, replaced by shadows and silence. In the beginning, I thought I was part of something holy. I believed that everything I was doing, every sermon I delivered, every prayer I recited, was for the greater good. But the church, with all its rituals and doctrines, was hiding something far darker. The truth I had uncovered was not an isolated incident. It was the tip of the iceberg, a small part of a much larger web of deception that stretched back for centuries. The archives in the Vatican are like no other. The walls are thick with history, and the air is dense with the weight of secrets. The deeper I went, the colder it became. There are rooms within the Vatican where time itself seems to slow, where the air feels heavy with forgotten knowledge. It was in one such room that I found myself one evening, cataloging documents that had been untouched for decades. The candles flickered, casting long shadows across the room. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. As I sifted through the dust-covered scrolls, I felt something shift within me. A quiet voice, barely audible, told me to stop, to leave everything behind and walk away. But curiosity, that insistent, burning curiosity, pushed me forward. I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. And that's when I found it. A letter, carefully folded and sealed, with no name on the outside. The wax seal was old, chipped, but unmistakable. It was a message from someone who knew the truth, someone who had dared to ask the questions I had been too afraid to ask. The letter was written in Latin, but there was something strange about the language. It wasn't the Latin I had learned in the seminary. It was archaic, older, as if the words themselves had been deliberately obscured. I carefully translated it, my hands trembling as I read each word. The letter spoke of forbidden knowledge, of ancient texts that had been hidden away for centuries, of truths that were never meant to see the light of day. It was clear that the Church had gone to great lengths to erase the past, to rewrite history in its own image. I had suspected it, but now I had proof. The Church wasn't just guarding history, it was controlling it. The manuscripts I had read, the truths I had uncovered, were not mistakes or accidents. They were deliberate acts of censorship, part of a larger plan to manipulate the narrative of history. The documents were clear. Certain events had been erased, certain names had been struck from the records, and entire centuries of history had been rewritten to serve the Church's agenda. I spent days poring over the letter, cross-referencing it with the texts I had already uncovered. The more I read, the more I realized that the story of the world, the story of humanity, was not what we had been told. The church had shaped history to fit its needs, removing anything that didn't serve its purpose. And the most terrifying part was that this manipulation wasn't a thing of the past. It was happening right before my eyes. I had always believed that the church was a force for good, a protector of faith and truth. But now I saw the truth for what it really was. The church was a machine of control, using religion as a tool to shape the minds of the faithful. It wasn't about salvation, it was about power. The power to control the narrative, to decide what people believed, to shape the future by rewriting the past. But I wasn't the only one who knew the truth. The letter I found was not a secret. It was a message, a warning, passed down through generations. There were others who had come before me, others who had asked the same questions and uncovered the same truths. Some had spoken out, and they had been silenced. Some had written their findings down, and their works had been hidden away. And some had simply disappeared. The more I learned, the more I realized that this was a battle that had been fought for centuries. A battle not between good and evil, but between those who sought to control the truth and those who sought to uncover it. The church had been hiding the truth, but it was no longer enough to simply bury it. The truth was starting to leak out, starting to find its way into the light. And that scared the church more than anything. I knew I had to act. I couldn't keep living this lie. I couldn't continue serving an institution that was built on deception. But what could I do? I had taken vows. I had sworn my life to the service of God and His church. How could I turn my back on that? How could I walk away from everything I had believed in? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the vows I had taken had never been about protecting the truth. They had been about protecting the institution. And that was not the same thing. The truth was not in the walls of the Vatican. It was not in the rituals, the prayers, or the sermons. The truth was in the stories that had been silenced, in the names that had been erased, in the history that had been rewritten. And now, as I sat in the darkness of the Vatican's deepest archives, I knew that the only way forward was to speak the truth. Not for myself, but for the people who had been lied to for centuries. I had seen the cracks in the walls. I had uncovered the hidden knowledge. And I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. The church had tried to silence the truth. But I would not be silent. It was time to tell the world what I had learned. The forbidden discovery, the encounter with the manuscripts. As the days passed, the weight of what I had uncovered began to settle in my soul, like a burden that I could not cast off. I knew that what I had found in those archives was only the beginning, and the deeper I delved into the hidden corners of the Vatican, the more I realized that I was on the precipice of something far greater than I had ever imagined. The more I uncovered, the more I began to understand the magnitude of the deception. The church had always been a fortress of knowledge, a place where the faithful came for salvation, for answers, for truth. But what I was finding beneath its ancient stone walls was not salvation. It was control. The more I read, the more I realized that the Vatican wasn't just a place of worship. It was a machine designed to curate history, to shape the past to fit the present. And the more I dug into those records, the more it became clear. The truth I was searching for had been deliberately hidden, buried under layers of doctrine and ritual. It was in one of the deepest corners of the Vatican's archives that I made the discovery that would forever change the course of my life. I had been given a seemingly routine task: to catalog a collection of ancient scrolls and manuscripts. Most of them were in Latin, and the content was familiar to me. Passages from the Bible, theological writings, and religious texts that I had read countless times. But as I opened one particular scroll, something inside me shifted. The handwriting was different. The language was foreign. It wasn't Latin at all. It was something older, something forgotten. My fingers trembled as I carefully unrolled the scroll, my eyes scanning the delicate parchment. The symbols were strange, not like any language I had seen before. There were intricate patterns, glyphs that seemed to dance across the page. It felt as though the writing itself was alive, as if the words were beckoning me to understand them. And as I continued reading, I realized that this wasn't just a text about faith. It was a text about something much darker, something far more dangerous. The manuscript told the story of an ancient civilization, one that had existed long before Christianity had spread across the world. It spoke of knowledge that had been passed down through the ages, knowledge that was far more advanced than anything the church was willing to admit. The text detailed the construction of machines, devices that could control the very fabric of time itself. It spoke of stars and planets, of cycles that stretched beyond our understanding, of technologies that had been lost to history. It was a blueprint for a world that had been forgotten, a world that the church had deliberately erased. I sat there, frozen, my mind racing. How could this exist? Why had I never seen anything like it before? I had spent my life studying theology, reading sacred texts, and preaching to the faithful, and yet here I was, holding a document that not only contradicted everything I had been taught, it shattered the very foundation of my beliefs. I knew in that moment that I had found something I wasn't supposed to see, something that had been hidden for centuries, locked away from the world. What? Why was this knowledge concealed? Why were these ancient truths kept from the people? As I read further, I discovered that the manuscript wasn't just a record of forgotten technologies or ancient wisdom. It was a record of manipulation, a detailed account of how the church had orchestrated the rewriting of history, of how entire civilizations had been erased from the annals of time. Names, events, even entire periods had been deleted from the historical record, replaced by the narrative the church wanted to control. It wasn't just the suppression of knowledge, it was the creation of a new reality. A reality where the church stood at the center, where its doctrines were absolute and unquestionable, where the faithful were kept in the dark, ignorant of the truth. The manuscript spoke of a deliberate campaign to erase any knowledge that challenged the church's authority. It described how texts had been destroyed, how libraries had been burned, how scholars who dared to question the church's teachings were silenced, imprisoned, or worse. I had always known that the church had power, but this was something different. This was the power to control not just people, but history itself. And as I read on, I realized that the story I had been taught, the story that the church had given me to preach, was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. The manuscript spoke of the ancient Gospels, texts that had been deemed heretical by the church and buried under layers of silence. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas. These were not just forgotten texts. They were intentionally hidden, erased from the official narrative of Christianity because they contained truths that the church could not control. They contained ideas that threatened its power. One particular passage caught my eye. It described a teaching from Jesus that was radically different from the message I had been preaching. "The kingdom of God is within you," it read. The words were simple, yet profound. The idea that the divine could reside within each of us, that we could find salvation through our own understanding and connection to the divine, was a direct challenge to the authority of the church. It was a message of personal empowerment, of self-discovery, of freedom from the control of organized religion. How could this be? How could the church suppress such a powerful message? What? As I sat there, my hands shaking as I held the manuscript, I realized that the answer was clear. The church didn't just want to control people's actions, it wanted to control their thoughts. It wanted to control their understanding of the divine, their relationship with God. It wanted to be the sole authority, the gatekeeper of truth, the one and only path to salvation. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't ignore what I had found. I knew that if I continued down this path, I was risking everything. My vocation, my reputation, my very life. But I couldn't go back. The truth was too powerful. The truth had to be shared, no matter the consequences. And so, I made a decision. I would continue my investigation. I would uncover every secret, every manuscript, every piece of knowledge that had been hidden from the world. I would expose the truth, no matter what it cost me. Because once you know the truth, you can never go back to the lies. And I couldn't live in the darkness any longer. The confrontation with the truth, the deadly revelation. I had no idea what I was getting into when I first opened those manuscripts. It felt like a seed had been planted within me, a seed that quickly grew into a towering tree of questions that couldn't be ignored. The truth I was beginning to uncover wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. And as much as I tried to reason with myself, as much as I tried to dismiss the doubts creeping into my heart, I knew deep down that I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The more I dug, the more I found. Manuscripts hidden in locked vaults, scrolls that had been deliberately erased from the historical record, gospels that contradicted the official teachings of the church. These were not mere relics of the past. They were weapons, and the church had kept them buried for a reason. Every page I turned, every document I uncovered, only deepened the mystery. But it wasn't just the contents of the texts that shocked me. It was the realization that I had become a part of something much darker, something far more insidious than I could have ever imagined. The Vatican is a place built on secrecy. The deeper you go, the more you realize how much of the history we've been taught is nothing more than a carefully curated story, one designed to shape our beliefs, our understanding of the world, and our place in it. The more I uncovered, the more I felt like I was unraveling a tapestry that had been woven together over centuries, a tapestry that kept the truth hidden beneath layers of lies. It wasn't just the manuscripts that shocked me. It was the people who had come before me, priests, scholars, thinkers, who had uncovered the same truths and paid the price for it. They had been silenced, erased from history, their names stripped from the records. Some had been exiled, others imprisoned, and some had simply vanished, their work left to gather dust in the forgotten corners of the Vatican. And I couldn't help but wonder, what had happened to them? What had they discovered that was so dangerous, so threatening to the Church's power, that they had to be erased from memory? I started to feel the weight of my own position. I had always believed that my work as a priest was to serve God, to protect His teachings, to guide the faithful. But now, I was faced with the uncomfortable truth that the very institution I had devoted my life to was built on a foundation of deceit. The Church didn't just control the faith. It controlled history, memory, and even truth itself. One evening, as I sat in the dimly lit archives, sifting through yet another stack of forbidden texts, I realized the full scope of the Church's manipulation. There were entire periods of history that had been erased, entire events that had been altered, reshaped, or buried to serve the narrative of the Church. Names of people who had lived, contributed, and fought for truth were nowhere to be found. And the more I dug, the more I realized that the story we had been taught, the story of Christianity, was not the whole truth. It was a performance, a grand play in which we were all actors, reading from a script that had been written long before our time. The manuscript I had uncovered, the one that spoke of ancient technologies, lost civilizations, and forgotten knowledge, wasn't an anomaly. It was just one part of a much larger story. The Church had known about these texts, These secrets, for centuries, they had deliberately hidden them from the public, fearing that the truth would tear down everything they had built. And I was beginning to understand why. As I sat there, reading through the scrolls and scribes of ancient knowledge, it became clear that the church had manipulated history to maintain its grip on power. They didn't just control the narrative, they controlled time itself. The changes in the calendar, the rewriting of events, the destruction of ancient texts, it was all part of a larger plan to suppress the truth and maintain control over the people. I had always believed that the church was a force for good, a protector of truth, a guide to salvation. But now, I was faced with the terrifying possibility that the church was nothing more than a tool for power, a machine that used faith to control the masses. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized that the truth was far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. But it wasn't just the past that was being hidden. It was the present too. The Vatican, with all its power and influence, had built a system designed to suppress knowledge, to control what people believed, to shape their understanding of the world. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep the church's influence reached, into politics, into history, into the very fabric of our lives. I had already made the decision to confront the truth, to share what I had learned. But now I understood the cost. The church would not allow this to go unchallenged. They would do everything in their power to silence me, to make sure that the truth I had uncovered never saw the light of day. One night, as I was preparing to leave the archives, I was confronted by a figure I did not recognize. He was an older priest, one I had never seen before. His eyes were cold, his expression unreadable. He told me that I had gone too far, that I was treading on dangerous ground, and that if I didn't stop, there would be consequences. I was taken aback. I had never been threatened by anyone within the church, least of all a fellow priest. But as I listened to him speak, I realized the truth. The church wasn't just a religious institution, it was a powerful organization, one willing to do anything to maintain its control. And I was now a threat to that control. I left that meeting shaken, my mind racing. I knew that I couldn't turn back now. The truth was out and I had to share it. But I also knew that the church would stop at nothing to silence me. The danger had become real, and the consequences of my actions were becoming clearer by the day. I wasn't sure how long I had before they came for me. But I knew one thing for sure. Once you uncover the truth, once you see the cracks in the facade, there's no going back. You can't unsee what you've seen. And now I was in too deep. The truth had set me free, but it had also condemned me. And there was no turning back from what I had uncovered. The price of truth, the beginning of the end. The days that followed my meeting with the mysterious priest were filled with a quiet dread. Every step I took, every word I spoke, felt like a calculated risk. I could no longer trust anyone in the church, not even those I had once called brothers. The shadows that had begun to hover over me now felt like a heavy weight, a presence lurking just behind every corner, every door. It was as though the Vatican had become a living, breathing entity, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I had always believed that the church was a place of light, a sanctuary of truth, but now I knew the truth had been buried deep within its walls, hidden away from the very people it claimed to serve. The Vatican wasn't just a religious institution, it was a fortress, one built to protect its secrets, its power, its control, and I had inadvertently become its greatest threat. The letter I had uncovered, the one that detailed the church's manipulation of history, wasn't the only document I had found. There were others, thousands of pages, manuscripts, and records that spoke of a grand scheme to shape the past, to erase the inconvenient truths, to rewrite history in a way that would serve the church's interests. The more I read, the more I realized that this wasn't just about controlling the present, it was about controlling the future, shaping the very narrative of humanity itself. I knew I had to act quickly, but the truth was, I didn't know where to begin. Who would believe me? Who could I trust? The Vatican had its spies everywhere, its informants in every corner. If I spoke out, if I exposed what I had learned, the consequences would be dire. I had already seen the lengths to which the Church would go to protect its secrets. They had erased the names of those who had come before me, silenced the voices of those who dared to speak the truth. And now I feared that I would be next. One night, as I sat alone in my small quarters, reviewing the documents I had collected, a knock came at the door. I hesitated before opening it, my heart racing in my chest. When I did, I was met by a figure cloaked in shadow, a man I didn't recognize. His face was obscured, but his eyes gleamed with a cold, unsettling intensity. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice low and calm. "You've gone too far. You know too much. It's time to stop." I didn't reply. I couldn't. My mind was spinning, and my heart was pounding in my chest. Was this another priest sent to warn me? Or was this the hand of the Vatican itself, coming for me at last? "The Church doesn't take kindly to traitors," the man continued. "You've seen things you shouldn't have. You've uncovered truths that were never meant to be known. And now you'll pay the price." His words hit me like a blow to the chest. I knew he was right. I had gone too far. The walls were closing in around me, and there was no way out. But even as the fear gripped my heart, something inside me refused to back down. I had seen the truth. I had uncovered the lies that the Church had built its empire upon. And no matter what it cost me, I couldn't let it go. I stood up, meeting the man's gaze. "I won't be silenced," I said, my voice steady. "You can't erase the truth. Not anymore." For a moment, there was silence. Then the man nodded, as if he had been expecting my response. "Very well," he said, stepping back into the shadows. "But know this, you are not alone in this fight. There are others, people who have seen what you've seen, who know what you know. And we're watching. We're waiting. When the time is right, we will act." Before I could say anything, the man turned and disappeared into the darkness of the corridor, leaving me standing there, stunned. Who were these people? And why were they watching me? The encounter left me shaken, but it also filled me with a new sense of resolve. I wasn't the only one who had uncovered the truth. I wasn't the only one who had seen the Church for what it truly was. There were others, people who had been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment, I realized, was drawing near. The truth was starting to spread. The walls the Church had built to protect its secrets were beginning to crumble, and I was no longer alone in my fight. But even as I felt this new surge of hope, I couldn't ignore the danger. The Church wasn't just a religious institution. It was a network, a vast and powerful machine that would stop at nothing to protect its secrets. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how deep the roots of corruption ran. This wasn't just a battle for truth, it was a battle for survival. I knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The Church would come for me, and it would do everything in its power to silence me. But I also knew that I couldn't turn back. I had seen too much, and the truth I had uncovered was too powerful to ignore. The time had come for me to make a choice: to stay silent, to live in fear, or to speak out, to risk everything for the truth. As I sat there, contemplating my next move, I realized that I had already made my choice. The truth was out, and there was no going back. And no matter what the Church tried to do to stop me, I would never stop fighting for what I knew was right. But I wasn't naive. I knew the price of truth. And I knew that the consequences of my actions would be far-reaching. The church had already shown me its power, its ability to erase those who opposed it. And now, it was my turn to face the consequences of the truth I had uncovered. But there was one thing I knew for certain. I could no longer serve an institution built on lies. I could no longer live in the shadow of a church that had manipulated the truth for centuries. I had to expose it, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The final revelation, the cost of defying the church. The days after my confrontation with the shadowed figure grew long, heavy with anticipation and dread. Every step I took was watched. Every conversation I had was measured, as if I could never fully escape the feeling of being tracked, as though my every action was being recorded by eyes that never blinked. The church had always been a place of safety, of comfort, but now, it felt like a cage, and I was trapped inside it. The walls that had once seemed so sacred now felt like the stone prisons of a forgotten age. I was not a servant of God anymore. I was a prisoner, a threat to the institution that had raised me, shaped me, and indoctrinated me into its ways. I had spent my entire life in the service of the church, believing that it was the path to salvation, the guardian of truth. But now, with the knowledge I had uncovered, I saw it for what it truly was, a fortress built on deception, a fortress that used faith as a weapon to control the masses, to suppress the truth, and to rewrite history to suit its own agenda. It wasn't just about power, it was about controlling memory, about erasing the inconvenient truths that had been buried beneath centuries of dogma. But I wasn't going to be silent anymore. No matter the cost, I had already made my decision. The truth had to be revealed, and the world needed to know what lay hidden behind the high walls of the Vatican, behind the polished robes of the clergy, and beneath the golden altars of the church. They had silenced so many before me, erased so many voices, but I would not allow my voice to be silenced. I couldn't. The truth had to come to light. I began to make plans. The manuscripts I had uncovered, the texts that spoke of forgotten histories and suppressed knowledge, were not meant to stay hidden forever. They were my weapon. They were the key to unlocking the truth. I knew the church would come for me, they had already warned me, but I also knew that I was no longer afraid of them. I had seen too much. I had uncovered too many lies. And no matter what they did, I could never go back to the man I once was. In secret, I began to reach out to others, people who had uncovered the same truths, people who had seen the cracks in the facade and were brave enough to speak out. I found a small group of scholars, historians, and former priests who had been ostracized for questioning the official narrative. We began to piece together the story the church had worked so hard to bury. We discovered more hidden manuscripts, more erased records, more evidence of the church's manipulation of history. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that the church's control of history went far beyond just the Vatican archives. It was everywhere, in our textbooks, in our culture, in our very understanding of time itself. The church had shaped our reality, guided our perceptions, and dictated the truth of what we knew. And now it was my job to expose it all, to share the forbidden knowledge, to reveal the hidden history, and to wake the world up to the lies that had been constructed over centuries. But I was not naive. I knew that the church would stop at nothing to protect its secrets. The Vatican was a fortress, and it would defend its walls with everything it had. I had already seen how far they would go to silence those who dared to question them. I had seen their power, their reach, their ability to erase anyone who stood in their way. But I also knew that the truth was too important. It was bigger than any one person, bigger than any one institution. The truth was universal, and it was time the world knew it. As I made preparations to expose what I had learned, I began to notice strange things happening around me. The warnings had come, but now they were becoming more sinister. I found messages slipped under my door, threats whispered in the halls, strange figures watching me from afar. I could feel the presence of the church everywhere I went, closing in on me like a dark cloud that would soon consume me. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't back down. One evening, as I sat in my study, going over my notes and planning my next move, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a cold shiver ran down my spine as I stood to answer it. When I opened the door, I was met by two men in dark suits, their faces expressionless, their eyes cold. They didn't speak at first, they just stared at me as if sizing me up, deciding whether I was worth the trouble. Finally, one of them spoke, his voice calm and measured, but there was an edge to it, something that made my blood run cold. "Father," he said, "you've gone too far. The church has given you many chances, but you've chosen your path. Now you must face the consequences." I stood frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what this meant. The church wasn't going to wait for me to speak out. They were going to silence me. They were going to do whatever it took to prevent the truth from coming to light. The other man stepped forward, his face blank, but his presence was oppressive, suffocating. He handed me an envelope, sealed in wax, the insignia of the Vatican stamped on it. "We advise you to take the next few days to reconsider," he said. "It's not too late to turn back. If you do, we can make this go away. But if you don't..." I didn't need to hear the rest. I had made my decision. They were warning me, but I wasn't afraid anymore. They couldn't intimidate me. I had already seen the truth, and once you've seen the truth, there's no going back. The world needed to know what the church had hidden, what it had kept from them for centuries. As the two men turned to leave, I stood there, staring at the envelope in my hand. I knew what I had to do. I would expose everything. I would reveal the truth, no matter the cost. And if the church came for me, I would face them head-on, because I knew that I was no longer alone. There were others out there, others who had seen the cracks, who were ready to fight alongside me. Together, we would bring down the walls of deception that the church had built, and we would reveal the truth that had been buried for so long. The time had come. The truth was ready to be revealed. And nothing, not the church, not the Vatican, nothing could stop me now.